Welcome to the next series of the CSOsandbox podcast program. The emphasis of this new series addresses what is rapidly becoming the real purpose of strategy today. That's giving organisations the capacity to regenerate continually, not just to plan periodically. Let me start with a simple observation. Most leaders already know the current strategy model is under strain. The more interesting question is this, however. How prepared are we to respond to unexpected shifts in our business environment that we can't control, when our current systems were never designed for this level of change? Geopolitical fractures, new regulatory regimes, climate and energy transition, accelerating automation and shifting demographics. These forces are overlapping and accelerating. No one really knows how they'll combine, interact or unfold over time. And that uncertainty changes the role of strategy fundamentally. Here's the heart of it. As the environment becomes more complex, senior leaders face a simple choice. Make the organisation more flexible and diverse, or find ways to simplify the environment they face. Do neither, and you lose control. That's why regeneration, the ability to renew strategy and organisation continually rather than episodically, has become the core strategic problem. But before we go any further, there is one distinction that quietly underpins everything in this series, and it's worth naming explicitly. What most organisations call strategy today is being asked to do two very different jobs at the same time. On the one hand, it is expected to engage with an uncertain future, to explore emerging technologies, shifting environments, discontinuities, and possibilities that cannot yet be resolved. On the other hand, it is expected to commit the organisation to provide coherence, direction, legitimacy, and a basis for action. Those two roles are related, but they're not the same. Engaging with uncertainty, that's exploring futures, holding ambiguity, sensing what may matter before it's obvious, is a strategic intelligence task. It is about expanding what the organisation can see and imagine without obligation or commitment. On the other hand, making judgments, deciding what should endure, what must change, and what direction is appropriate now is another form of intelligence. It's a strategy task. It's about coherence, legitimacy, and responsibility under uncertainty. Much of the strain we see in contemporary strategy practice comes from collapsing these two forms of intelligence and their roles into one. Exploration is forced to sound decisive too early, and judgment is asked to absorb uncertainty it was never designed to carry. This series is built on the premise that regeneration becomes possible only when strategic intelligence and strategy are separated, connected, and governed correctly, not when they are blurred together. Everything that follows, therefore, assumes that distinction, even when it is not called out explicitly. Faced with that reality, the biggest strategic risk is not failure. It is being unprepared for what emerges. Opportunities appear first, outside established categories. Threats arrive in unfamiliar forms. New combinations of technology, regulation, and social need create value spaces that did not exist when the last strategy cycle concluded. We've seen this play out in financial services over the past few years. Open banking regulation, cloud platforms, and changing customer expectations combined to create entirely new value spaces around real-time payments, embedded finance, and data-driven lending. The institutions that had only optimized their existing products and annual planning cycles struggled to respond quickly, while those with the ability to reconfigure offerings, partnerships, and governance on the fly stepped into those spaces early. That wasn't a planning advantage, it was a regeneration advantage. And yet, despite all of this, most organisations are still engaging the future using annual or episodic strategy cycles, those designed for a world that moved more slowly and behaved more predictably. Moral of the story? Opportunity is fleeting. Problems requiring adaptation take a little bit longer, or maybe a lot longer. The mismatch doesn't usually show up as an immediate crisis. Instead, it appears as missed opportunities, late reactions, cautious commitments, and a growing sense that strategy is always slightly behind reality. What's missing is not intelligence, effort, or intent. What's missing is a system capable of engaging with emergence itself. This is where we need to change how we think about strategy. Strategy is no longer primarily about choosing a position, committing to a plan, and executing it efficiently. Those ideas still matter, but they are now structurally inadequate for the environment we're in. That's why third wave strategy takes a systems-based approach to strategy practice and regeneration. Strategy under third wave strategy increasingly needs to function as a regenerative capability. By regeneration, I mean the organisation's ability to renew itself, not just once, but repeatedly as the environment evolves. This includes two distinct but related forms of change. First, adaptive regeneration. It's the capacity to reconfigure existing capabilities, activities and priorities while preserving coherence as conditions shift. Second is inventive regeneration. This is the capacity to create entirely new strategic logics, architectures, and value creation models when existing ones no longer fit. What makes the current moment different is that both forms are now required at the same time and often continuously. Annual planning cycles were never designed to handle that. When confronted with the unexpected, organisations often respond by tightening control. More data, more dashboards, more KPIs, more governance gates. Sometimes even rapid restructuring and cost-cutting, represented as transformation, occur. Control systems are extraordinarily good at managing known variance. They tell us whether we are on track, within bounds, and compliant with expectations, which is precisely not what we most need when the environment itself is changing. You can see this in the energy sector. As renewables cost fell, storage improved, and climate policies tightened. Entirely new value spaces opened up around distributed generation, grid-scale storage, and flexibility services. Many incumbents doubled down on control. More reporting, more risk filters, more capital approval gates, and in the process filtered out exactly the kinds of small experimental projects that would have built a position in those emerging spaces. Few, however, treated this as a regeneration challenge. They created protected portfolios for new business models, adjusted governance so small bets could be made and scaled, and allowed their organisations to learn their way into the new economics before the crisis arrived. This is why the strategic challenge is not primarily technological or analytical. It is cognitive and organisational. It is about how organisations see, interpret, and legitimise change. Rather than critiquing existing systems, let's describe the implication constructively. When the future is emergent rather than predictable, strategy cannot be episodic. It must be continual. Not in the sense of constant decision-making or restless activity, but in the sense of continual exploration, judgment, certainly learning, and, of course, renewal. This means creating spaces where futures can be explored without obligation. Judgments can be made deliberately rather than implicitly. Action can proceed provisionally rather than irreversibly, and learning from action can reshape direction before crisis forces the issue. This is not about being reactive, it's about remaining open long enough to recognise what the future is actually offering. There is an optimistic dimension to all of this that often gets overlooked. Uncertainty does not only amplify risk, it also expands the space of possibility. New technologies lower barriers in some places and raise them in others. Environmental constraints create entirely new markets. Social and political shifts reshape what organisations are expected to deliver and what they can legitimately become. Organisations capable of imagining multiple futures, holding direction lightly and regenerating deliberately are not merely defending themselves against disruption, they are positioned to benefit from it. The strategic question then is no longer, can we predict the future? It is, are we organised to notice, evaluate and legitimise change as it unfolds? This podcast series exists to explore that question, not from the perspective of trends or tools, but from the perspective of judgment, good governance, organisational intelligence and renewal over time. Across the episodes, we will examine topics such as why organisations struggle to change before crisis, how strategy can be reframed as judgment under uncertainty, how implementation can become a regenerative process rather than execution theatre, why adaptive and inventive regeneration must be governed differently, and how leaders, particularly CFOs, CEOs, senior leaders and boards, shape an organisation's capacity to renew itself responsibly. We'll work with real cases and practical mechanisms, not abstract ideals. Let me leave you with this thought. The future will not wait for your next strategy review. It will arrive in fragments, weak signals, sudden opportunities and unanticipated combinations. Some threatening, some beneficial, many ambiguous. The organisations that thrive will not be those with the most confident predictions. They will be those with the strongest systems for continual learning and renewal, and an ability to adapt and invent when appropriate. In the next episode, we'll begin by asking a deceptively simple question. Why do organisations so often need crisis before they can change, even when they know disruption is coming? That's where the deeper work begins. I look forward to joining you then. My name is Paul Hunter. Thanks for listening.